Hello everyone. In today's video I'm going to be walking you through the steps for how to create one of these shadow boxes using cardstock and foam core. First off, you should have picked up a set of supplies from the school, and it should come in a bag that looks like this, and this will have all the materials you need to do this project. You'll have a hot glue gun, at least 4 glue sticks, 4 pieces of foam core, 2 big, 2 small, and then several pieces of kind of like thin foam core, as well as some 4 pieces of cardstock paper. Now first off, everyone will receive a hot glue gun so you can assemble your creation. Each hot gun might be a little bit different brand or type, but they're all basically the same. You'll get some glue sticks and you'll stick those in the back of it, squeeze the trigger to kind of get it in there. And then you're going to have to plug this in and let it warm up for about 5 minutes. Important thing is don't touch the end of the glue gun. The ends of the glue gun are going to be very warm. Some of you may have ones that look a bit like this. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is take our 4 pieces of foam core and we're going to be applying them, assembling them together using the hot glue gun. So our box is going to take a rectangular shape, so we're going to take one short piece and one large piece, and we're going to put a little strip of hot glue and press the 2 of them together. You may want to hold it for a moment until it feels like it's secure and it's dried. Once that looks good, you'll keep on going. Put a line of hot glue and then press the foam core to it. Be careful not to touch the hot glue with your finger or the tip of the glue gun, as that can definitely burn your finger and leave kind of a welt on your finger. It does hurt. These are high temperature glue guns, so be careful with both the glue and the tip of your gun. Once you've applied all the hot glue to the edges, just kind of press it firmly together and make sure it feels secure. Now I've got a bit of a gap here when I look at the outside of my box, so if you have some large gaps, take your hot glue gun and kind of slowly apply the glue into that gap so that it sinks into the space from the outside. One trick you can use with hot glue guns is use that hot nozzle of the gun to kind of smooth out and spread out the hot glue. Don't use your finger to spread the hot glue. Use the tip of the glue gun, because again, it will burn your fingers. Alright, so now I'm ready to start creating my artwork. Now before I get started, I've already pre-drawn my design. Now one thing I forgot to show on camera is before you draw anything on your papers, take a moment to make sure they actually fit in the space. It's very likely that after you build your box, you may need to trim your paper a little bit just to make sure that you can kind of easily slide it into the box. It shouldn't be too loose or too tight when you put the paper stacked up in the box. And you want to do this before you start drawing your design. So let's go back to our paper here. Now, before I've gotten started, I've sketched out my design, I've researched my idea, and I've done some planning, and I've already pre-drawn this particular layer. I'm starting with the foreground, and you notice that we are using scissors to do our cutting. So in order to cut out this hole in the middle, I'm kind of sticking my scissors through the paper, and it's kind of like the opening you might have on a plastic cup from a fast food restaurant. So I get some sort of opening made in the middle, and that will allow me movement to go ahead and start cutting out the edges. One important trick here when cutting out detailed images with a pair of scissors is to rotate the paper more than you are the scissors. So for the most part, I'm kind of holding the scissors at the same angle, and I'm turning the paper around the scissors. You're going to find it much easier to cut out interesting details if you do that. Ordinarily, this project is done with an X-Acto knife, but since we are working remotely and doing these projects from home this year, we're just going to use some regular old scissors. And you can still manage to do a good amount of detail with a pair of scissors. You still got to be careful not to cut your fingers when you're doing detail work like this. Now I've got this large chunk. I'm going to cut it loose just to get it out of my way so that it's not messing me up. And about this point, it starts to get hard to cut because of the angle. So if you're having trouble cutting within an area, you may have to come at that same spot from a different direction. So I've gone back to the bottom where I initially started, and now I'm going around the image from the other direction. So you can kind of cut half of it out, cutting upward towards the right, and then go back down and cut the other half of it going upwards towards the left. It's all about finding the angle that is most comfortable without having to force it or tear your paper or rip the paper. You want to be really careful not to cut out or cut off little delicate pieces like that tree branch. Now I've got one large hole cut out, and so now I'm going in and cutting out some smaller holes in between my tree branches in my design. Basically, in order to cut out that hole, I'm kind of pinching the paper and cutting a little slit, and then that lets me get my scissors in there and start cutting out details. It's a little tricky, but it is doable. An X-Acto knife is probably easier, but we're just going to stick with our scissors this time around. Alright, so I've cut out my foreground. Now I'm ready to cut out the middle ground of my paper. So when I'm drawing this design on here, I'm actually laying that first one on top of the second one so that I can see how these things are going to line up and overlap, right? I've already pre-drawn this out on a separate sheet of paper, just kind of as a rough sketch. And as I'm drawing it on here, I want to be careful to have things line up, you know, the way I need them to. So it helps to lay that first one. Once I've got it roughed in, I take away that foreground layer and I kind of finish out some of the other details. And then I'm ready to start cutting it out. So I kind of make my hole in the middle of the most open area. And then again, I'm rotating the paper. Instead of trying to turn my wrist at awkward angles, I'm just rotating the paper around my scissors. And I cut up to a point until it starts to feel awkward, and then I change directions. So I kind of come at it from the other side. And occasionally I may have to, you know, if you're getting into a really detailed area, like I'm cutting out a tree branch here, I may have to kind of slow down and try to figure out what the most comfortable angle is to cut out these shapes with my scissors. Alright, so I've got the main section cut out. Now I'm ready to cut out the two sections on the edge. One thing I am being careful to do here is I am leaving a bit of a border on the edge next to the trees. So we do want to have at least somewhat of a border that goes all the way around our paper, no matter what you're cutting out. And again, on this side you can see that as I cut out this last little section here, larger section, that I do leave that border edge to kind of hold this all together over there. Try to be careful with those little delicate pieces that you may have throughout your image. And then let's cut out our last little bit here. There we go, we've got our middle ground and we have our foreground. Looks like it's lining up good. So the next step, of course, is going to be creating the background. We have a minimum of 3 layers here, a foreground, a middle ground, and a background, working to create the illusion of depth, thinking about how things overlap and how we're using the space. So on today's example, I am honestly kind of keeping it relatively simple here, just for the purposes of making an example. You can definitely add a lot more to your background than just that. And you'll notice here, although this is a really simple background, make sure to leave that border edge. So you saw how there was a rectangle that goes all the way around. Now the last part here is we're going to start assembling this thing. We have a foreground, middle ground, and background. We've made sure the papers fit in here, not too loose, not too tight, and just pretty smoothly fit inside the box. We actually have 4 pieces of paper total. The last paper we don't actually cut into unless you're doing something real specific where you need to cut into the back paper. For example, you could have like a starry sky, cut holes. Now this is where those extra pieces of foam core come into play. You should have at least 6 of these pieces, but some of you probably have a few extra scraps. And at minimum, we're going to glue a piece at the top and at the bottom of our paper. So we have our blank sheet of paper, and we've glued a piece of foam core to the top and bottom. Now if you have a couple extras, or if you want to cut your foam cores into smaller pieces, a good idea is to add at least a little piece of foam core on the right and left edge as well, just to kind of keep the images from sagging as much. Alright, so we put down a layer of paper, and then we glue our foam core to the paper. Then we add our next layer of paper, and then we glue more foam core. So we're kind of sandwiching our pieces of paper between the foam core, and that's what gives it a little bit of space between each layer and helps to create some of the shadows that we see in the shadow box. One thing I am being careful to do here is one side of my paper I have drawn on with pencil, and it's kind of messy and a little ugly. So when I'm gluing these down, I've actually flipped the paper over to the clean side that I did not draw onto. Alright, and just one thin line of hot glue. And then we add our next piece of foam core. And then we'll add our next piece of paper. I'm taking some scraps and just sort of adding them on the left and right edges. Add our hot glue, and then stick our last piece of paper onto the stack. Alright, and so we've got layers of paper in between layers of foam core. Alright, and it's all glued together pretty sturdy. The back piece is just a flat piece of paper. And now we're ready to fit this into our box and attach it. This is the last part of the project. So make sure it's fitting nicely. If you do have problems with it fitting, you may need to trim it using a knife or scissors. Hopefully you don't need to do that. Now what I'm going to do is stick this into the box and then pull it out slightly and apply hot glue to the edge of our layers, and then just kind of slide that back into the box, and it should give it a pretty decent hold. Be careful not to stick your finger in the hot glue. Right, and then I'm going to apply a little bit more hot glue into that edge and kind of let it sink into the space as well as sort of set on top. Alright, so I stick the hot glue on there, and then I use the hot nozzle of the glue gun to kind of smooth it out. Use the nozzle of your glue gun to smooth out the glue. Don't use your fingers. The glue is very hot. Alright, so I just pull it out slightly, and I put a little glue there on the edge where the foam core is. And that's it. We are done with our creation. At the end, I just need to take some photos and upload them online.